Hello, everybody. Scott Golden here with the Golden Opportunities Coaching YouTube channel. And today we're going to talk about signs and symbols of emotional abuse. And so, emotional abuse is the use of words or actions to control and manipulate the emotions of another person for the purposes of this audio. That's the definition we're going to use. And so, there's 6 things I want to run through. They kind of all link together. And if you've ever kind of dealt with our videos before or audios before, you've probably heard some of this stuff, but I wanted to kind of put it all into a more condensed version. In any event, the first is the use of power to corrupt a person. So, the perception of power is one of those really tricky things for lots of people to deal with, in the sense that power can only be given, and power is only as good as the person perceiving that another person has it. So if you believe a person's smarter than you, or more connected than you, or they have more influence than you do, then automatically you're going to react to them differently than if you see them as an equal or lesser than you. And so if a person who has nefarious motives or means is trying to control another person, they will try to make themselves appear more powerful, more influential, more knowledgeable, more connected, whatever the case may be, in order to elicit certain responses from another person. And so, if, for example, a person needs help and the only person available to help them is a person who has less than friendly motives, it's very easy and actually quite likely that, they'll say, well, you couldn't make it without me, or what are you going to do if I leave, that type of thing. And ultimately, that use of power and the fear of a situation changing financially, emotionally, relationally, whatever, is a way that a person can power grab and ultimately use a level of authority that is perceived, although may not actually be there in reality, because most emotional abusers are super insecure, and so the reality is they're trying to scare their victim into submission, but the victim feels like they have no alternative, and that leads into the second point, which is the exploitation of weakness. An emotional abuser will find the weaknesses of their intended victim. It might be financial, it might be emotional support, it might be the weakness of the overuse of sexuality, it might be the weakness of what are you going to do, if you don't have somebody else. And these verbal barbs, which I might as well bring in, that verbal aggression is a major part of this, and emotional abuse and verbal abuse often go hand in hand. But these verbal barbs that exploit the weaknesses of another person is super valuable. And so, one of the things I work with people on a lot in coaching with relationships is, even if this relationship doesn't work, there's 7 billion people on the planet. Just because this person doesn't see your value doesn't mean that no one will. And oftentimes we're so programmed to believe that we've found our person, that this is the only person that's going to get us, that we stay in situations longer than we should. And it's not necessarily that we even love the person anymore, or we may even know, hey, this isn't healthy, but it's the best I can do. Hey, this isn't healthy, but I don't want to be alone. Hey, this isn't healthy, but I don't want people to judge me for having stayed this long. All of these explanations and exceptions cause the abuser to still have power, because they know that making changes is difficult for their victim, and the exploitation of the fear that the victim has is one of the strongholds that most abusers hold on to. The other kind of 3 things I want to run through pretty quickly are, at the end of the day, ignoring and the silent treatment. So, one of the biggest ways that an abuser can control and manipulate situations is by only giving feedback of any sort when a person is compliant. So this may come forward as a silent treatment, this may come forward as short, very tight answers, one word answers, 2 or 3 word phrases. Yes, I'm fine. No, it's okay. These sort of stonewall communication attempts, which ultimately lead to a person feeling that they have to apologize, which when you apologize to the abuser knows that he or she has affected you, therefore they continue the tact until you are submissive into kind of, whatever they wanted you to do in the first place. The next thing is they'll isolate you from social connectives. Now, this is a really interesting one because isolation from social connectives and family and friends is a horrible thing to do to a person. However, the other side is the affirmation that a person is being isolated from healthy relationships versus non-healthy relationships can be just as damaging. In other words, if, for example, a person who has positive meaning knows that re-interacting with a certain friend or certain family member or certain social group can have a negative impact on the progress of a friend or partner, standing up and saying, hey, this might not be a good idea, is often, what a loving person will do. It's a fine line, though, when a person's completely socially isolated to the point where they have no other option but to depend upon their significant other or their friend or their family member, whatever the case may be, the dynamic of the abusive connection. So it's one of those things where one really has to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But isolation without reason, isolation without previous history of negative consequence to certain relationships is never a good thing. However, there are cases where encouraging a person to isolate away from certain toxic relationships can be a good thing, so one has to look at the whole picture before using judgment, and also using discernment in those situations is super important because every situation in that dynamic can and often is different. So the next thing to consider is, and the final thing, is threats. Verbal, or the threat of physical violence, or the threat of withholding things, love, affection, sexuality, money, power, whatever the case may be. Threats, especially ones that aren't followed through on, but are left for later. Something like, you never know when I'm going to get even for this. You never know what I could do. All of these things can be indicators of a person who is using the power of intimidation and manipulation to get what they want. A threat doesn't have to be followed through on to be negative. Matter of fact, in many cases, the follow-through is secondary to the fear of the follow-through in terms of motivating factor for the victim to be compliant. So hopefully this is at least helpful. If you are going through emotional abuse of any sort, or you know someone who is, certainly it's worth seeking assistance and counsel. But I encourage you to keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Until next time, everybody.